our first program here is just a simple input and output, but we can also break this down a little bit. So this is an example that they would give you for sequence. So when we're talking about sequence selection and iteration, and they ask you to identify sequence in your programming, then this is really what we're looking for. You will, on your printed version, already see some questions, and I'm going to put those questions up one by one. So when we are looking at user input, we want to be thinking about our input statements, and we also want to be thinking about prints. And print statements can be shown in a number of different ways. You can see in here, I've got hello username and an exclamation mark at the end. You are absolutely right. Input is a built-in function for Python, and you can use this in your pseudocode as well. Input for Python, exactly the same. Input for pseudocode, exactly the same. Only difference with inputs for pseudocode is that you have to split your prompt, because a Python input includes the prompt as well. So it reduces what would normally be 2 lines of code down to 1. Okay, our next question for this really, really short piece of code is, in our last line, we've got a print statement. And I'd like you to see if you can change this for me. So instead of using print with hello and a comma, then username, what could I use instead? It's something that you would use in pseudocode. It's also something that's perfectly acceptable in Python. And the thing to remember with Python is that if you use a comma, and you can only use a comma in print, nothing else, not in inputs, that comma is automatically turning everything into text for you. It's turning it all into a string. Sometimes we might want to do this thing where we've got hello username, sticking them together, which is concatenation. And if we use that concatenation inside an input, we have to use this alternative symbol. And we also have to turn everything into a string. And that is absolutely perfect. Yes, we can use a plus symbol. So you could potentially use print, then hi, a little plus, and then their name. If you use that plus, you must also, if you use a number, put an str before it to turn it into a string. If it's already a string, like a name, absolutely fine, not a problem at all. Worth being aware though, because again, if you're trying to write syntax by hand, it can be a bit tricky, and it's worth having these things in your notes just so that you're aware of them. So if I was asked the question in the exam, how is this user's name stored and used in the program? Really, really short program. But again, when they give you these kind of pieces of Python, or potentially they won't give you Python at all, they will give you pseudocode, because they can't guarantee that everybody's using the same programming language. But if they did give you a program, how is that user's name stored? So we want to try and use technical wording at this stage. That's lovely. So we've got stored as a variable and printed. That's super. So when you are typing in your whiteboard, you don't need to pop it into the chat because I can see what you're typing. So the minute I think once you click away, I can actually see your whiteboard. So if we wanted to use our technical words and we wanted to give like maybe an extended answer for a slightly larger number of marks, what we could do is we could talk about the input. So because it asks how the user name is stored and how it's used, we can say when that user types a value and presses enter in the IDE, the data is then going to be stored in a variable. Fantastic. And I would possibly also give the name of the variable. The reason I'm doing this is using a technique called signposting. And signposting is where we are essentially shouting at our examiner, this is where I want the marks. So I'm going to make it overly obvious. The other thing that you said that I didn't is to say that it was printed. You're absolutely right. If I wanted to extend it again, I could say, and then the value of username is output to the screen in a concatenated sentence.